Have you ever wondered what can happen when we are alone with our own thoughts? Imagine entering your son's room while he's sleeping soundly. What would you do if you saw something you never imagined? I went in and found something that changed everything. If this intrigued you, stay until the end and don't forget to leave the comments what you think will happen next, and of course subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single detail of this story. Sometimes I think that motherhood is a chain of mistakes that we try to correct throughout our lives. I'm Elena, a 56-year-old woman, mother of 2 children, but this story isn't about my older daughter, but about my younger son Matto. I always thought I knew him well, but now I doubt everything I thought I knew. Matto is 23 years old. He has always been reserved even as a child, while his older sister talked about everything and everyone. Matto preferred to remain silent, hiding his thoughts behind a shh. My Smiley, as a mother, I tried to give him his space, but sometimes I feel like I failed to understand who he really is. Tonight something pushed me to do something I had never done before: enter his room while he was sleeping. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was pure curiosity, or maybe a need to confirm that everything was okay. But what I found was not what I expected. As I paused to remember that moment, I realized that my impulse was not accidental. There was something in his recent behavior, small details that didn't make sense, as if he was hiding something from this story. Isn't just about what I found, but about what I discovered about myself as a mother when I crossed that door. And here I am sitting in the living room listening to the ticking of the clock and wondering if I did the right thing by going in, because once you cross certain boundaries, there's no turning back. The house was in absolute silence. As if the whole world had stopped to observe missteps. At that time of night, everything seemed different. The dim light enveloped every corner, and the sound of the wind against the blinds mixed with the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was a silence that weighed, that spoke more than I wanted to hear. I climbed the stairs slowly, almost holding my breath. Each step echoed in my ears like a drum announcing my presence. I knew Matto was asleep. I had him close his bedroom door a few hours ago. But still my heart was beating fast, as if I was about to discover something forbidden. His bedroom door was slightly ajar. From the hallway, I could see a faint glow from his desk lamp, the one he always forgot to turn off before going to sleep. I remembered how much I insisted in his childhood that he keep everything in order, but over the years I had stopped insisting. It's a minor detail, I told myself, trying to avoid conflicts. As I approached, a part of me wanted to stop and go back to the living room, pretend that I never had the urge to go in, but something inside me was pushing me forward. It wasn't just curiosity, it was concern. In recent months Matto had been different, distracted, distant, almost as if he was avoiding any contact with me. He stopped in front of the door and took a deep breath. From inside, only the soft rhythm of his breathing could be heard. The atmosphere was calm, but it wasn't. I reached out to push the door, all the way feeling that each second weighed more than the last. I pushed the door, carefully trying not to make any noise. The dim light from the desk barely illuminated a corner of the room, leaving the rest in shadows. He was sleeping soundly, with his face relaxed, as if he were completely oblivious to the storm of thoughts that was going through me. My eyes scanned a room, looking for something that would explain that feeling of unease that had led me there. On the surface everything was normal: the books piled up messily on the desk, the jacket hanging on the back of the chair, and his laptop closed as he always left it before going to sleep. But something caught my attention. On his desk next to the lamp there was an open envelope. It wasn't a common envelope, it was one of those thick ones like Theon's used for important documents. I approached slowly, feeling my heart beat faster with each step. The contents of the envelope were partially visible, several sheets of paper carefully folded. My instinct told me that is how touch it, that crossing that line would be invading his privacy in an undeniable way, but curiosity that underscore was stronger. I took the sheets and unfolded them carefully. My hands were trembling as my I scanned the printed words. It was a racked, but not a common one. The heading was from a company whose name I didn't recognize, and the terms I was reading didn't make sense to me. There were mentions of significant figures, upcoming dates, and something about absolute confidentiality. I looked back at Matoho. Was still asleep, oblivious to my turmoil. I felt a knot in my stomach. What was this? What was my son doing? It was evident that something important was happening, something that they hadn't told me, and now that I had found these sheets, I knew that I couldn't simply leave them aside. I stood there motionless, with the papers in my hand, feeling the ground beneath my feet crumble. The contract was full of clauses that I didn't fully understand, but there was something that deeply disturbed me. The tone was almost intimidating, as if whoever had drafted it expected complete submission from whoever signed it. For a moment I wondered if I should wake him up and demand explanations, but how could I do that without betraying my guilt for having invaded his privacy? It was clear that what was happening was something important, something he didn't want me to talk. No, why did he not trust me? I left the papers on the table exactly as I had found them and backed away to the door. I looked at Matto once more, his face serene in contrast to the hurricane that was overwhelming me, reminding me that it was his life, his decision. But a voice in my head was shouting, what if he's in trouble? What if something bad is happening and he can't tell you? I Went downstairs almost on autopilot. My mind was going back and forth between 1,000 theories. I thought of everything: debts, strange jobs, relationships I didn't know about. Each possibility was more alarming than the last. As a mother, I always tried to respect his space, his privacy, but to had extent. Was that correct? Had I failed by not being more aware of his life? I sat on the sofa and watched the clock, which read 2 a.m. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, not with everything I had seen, and with all the unanswered questions that were piling up in my mind. What worried me most was not the contract itself, but the fact that Matto had kept it a secret. I ran my fingers along the arm of the sofa, trying to calm myself. I decided that I couldn't rush things. I needed time to think about how to approach the subject with him, so as not to push him even further away. But deep down I knew that that moment would come soon, and when it did, everything would change. The next day, I woke up early. Although I had barely slept, the feeling of unease was still lodged in my chest like a weight impossible to ignore. While preparing breakfast, I tried to act normal. I wanted to observe Matto, look for signs, something that would help me understand what was happening without him suspecting anything. When he came downstairs, his expression was the same as always, a mixture of tranquility and dissent. He greeted me with a muted good morning, as he usually did, and sat down at the table. I watched him pour coffee into his cup and take a piece of bread without even looking at me. For a moment I doubted myself. Maybe I was exaggerating, imagining things where there were no eyes. "Everything okay, Matto?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound casual. He looked up and gave me a fleeting smile. "Yes, Mom, everything's fine. Why do you ask?" There it was again, that invisible barrier that I had always felt between us. He was kind, but distant, as I've always kept toward corner of his life out of my reach. I didn't insist. I didn't want to seem invasive, but while he was having breakfast, I couldn't help but notice certain details: the slight tension in his shoulders, how he avoided me gaze for more than a few seconds. When he finished eating, he got up quickly and mumbled something about having things to do in his room. I watched him go upstairs, and that feeling off our knees returned with force. I decided that I couldn't sit idly by. If I wanted to understand what was happening, I would have to look for answers, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone. After clearing the table, I went to his room under the pretext of leaving some clean towels. I knocked softly on the door, and when I didn't hear a response, I went in. Matto was at his desk with his laptop open, but he quickly closed the screen when he saw me. His reaction was too quick. "Nervous? Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you," I said, trying to sound casual. "I just came to leave this for you." He nodded, murmuring it thanks, before looking back at his desk. Avoiding my gaze, I left the room with more questions than answers, but with the certainty that something was not right. During the following days, the atmosphere at home became more tense, although nothing seemed to indicate that Matto was aware of my growing distrust. Everything continued as usual. He would leave in the morning and return at night, spend hours locked in his room, and we would barely exchange a few words at breakfast or dinner. But I could no longer ignore the small signs, those gestures that had previously seemed harmless to me, and that now only fueled me. Arnie's one afternoon, when he went out with some friends, I found a new opportunity to check his room. I knew he was crossing a line, but curiosity no longer left me in peace. I entered his room as if it were the most natural thing in the world, trying not to arouse suspicion. I approached the desk, and there on the table was something that caught my attention: a mobile phone that I didn't recognize. It wasn't his, nor the one he usually used. It was more modern, of a model that I didn't remember having seen before. My first impulse was to leave it or ignore it, but something pushed me to pick it up. I turned it on with trembling hands. The phone was locked, but the screen showed several unread notifications. One message stood out above the others: "It's time, don't forget what we agreed." The phrase chilled my blood. What did they agree on? What was he talking about? I couldn't leave it like that. I sat in his desk chair with the phone in my hands, trying not to think about what I might be about to discover. The notifications continued to appear, short messages, almost coded. I didn't understand much, but the tone was clear. There was something that Matto was hiding, something much more serious than imagined. My heart was beating fast as I looked at the screen. How could he be so distant from me? What kind of life was he leading behind my back? I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront him and demand explanations, but I knew that would only push him further away. The truth weighed on me, but the feeling off crossing boundaries that I should never have touched weighed even more. The night arrived with an unsettling calm throughout the day. Matto didn't mention anything about the phone or about the strange attitude he had had in recent days, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The tension between us was already palpable, and I couldn't continue to ignore what I had discovered. I waited until he locked himself in his room. Ash always did at nightfall. His routine was almost predictable. He would put on his headphones, sit in front of his computer, and everything would fall silent. However, that night I felt that I couldn't remain silent any longer. I went upstairs with my heart racing, determined to face whatever was happening. I knocked on his bedroom door, and this time I didn't wait for a response. I opened it slowly and found him, as always, sitting at his desk, immersed in his world. But as soon as he saw me, his expression changed, and I could notice a slight tension in his face. "Matto," I said in a firm voice, "I need to talk to you." He looked up surprised by the seriousness in my tone, but he didn't say anything. He remained silent, waiting for me to break the ice. I approached his desk and left the phone on the table in front of him. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was trembling but I tried to remain firm. "Why is it a phone that I sent tires? Why have you been hiding all this from me?" His face broke down, and for a moment I didn't know if anger, shame or fear was what dominated him. Finally he spoke in a low, almost inaudible tone. "It's not what it seems, Mom, but he couldn't finish the sentence." I stared at him, waiting for an explanation, but he looked away as if searching for a way out of the conversation that he couldn't control. "What are you doing, Matto?" I asked in a broken voice, but not out of anger, but out of the sadness of knowing that I had failed in something fundamental, trusting him in his honesty. Finally, after a few seconds of silence, Matto sighed and began to speak. What he told me not only surprised me but left me completely speechless. What he had been hiding was not only something related to a strange job but something much deeper that I never imagined could involve me. Matto looked me in the eyes for the first time in dices if he had finally decided to open a door that he had kept closed for a long time. "Mom, you don't know everything I've been going through. I didn't want you to know anything because I didn't want you to worry, but I can't keep hiding it anymore." I felt my legs weaken as if the weight of his words suddenly fell on me. What could be happening that made him hide from me, that made him feel the need to lie and hide his life? My son, always so open with me, now seemed like a stranger. "What are you hiding, Matto?" I asked, unable to contain the anguish that was building up in my chest. "What's going on? I don't understand any of this." He took a deep breath and with his head down began to tell me what he had been doing in secret. "It's an organization, a group that contacted me a while ago. At first I didn't really understand what they wanted, but then they offered me a job, something that could help me get money quickly. I thought it would be something simple, but I ended up getting involved with whom? Why didn't you tell me?" "It's complicated, Mom," he said, rubbing his forehead with his hand. "I didn't want you to see me as a disappointment, but I've been working for them on things that I didn't know if I want to keep doing, and the phone is because I use it to communicate with them. The messages are instructions for what I have to do and I can't leave it now. If I do I risk losing everything." My hands were trembling as it processed what I had just heard. It hot of everything Matto had done to get to that point, everything he had hidden from me, and how our relationship had changed without me realizing it. A deep fear took hold of me. What kind of people were those? What had my son done for money? "Matto, what have you gotten yourself into?" I whispered, almost unable to speak, but he couldn't give me a clear answer. He just looked at me, lost, as I no longer knew how to get out of that situation. It was a blow that I didn't expect, but that at the same time felt inevitable. My son was trapped in something bigger than him, something he hadn't fully understand, and worst of Ali couldn't do anything to stop him. The conversation with Matto left me completely devastated. I didn't know how to react or what to do with all the information he had revealed to me. I felt the ground crumbling beneath my feet. Everything I had built around my relationship with him, everything I had believed about his life, was now in ruins. I slowly retreated from his room, letting silence fill the space between us. I went downstairs without knowing which way to turn. Should I intervene, do something to stop him, or should I let him face his own mistakes, even if it meant losing him? Every thought in my head seemed like an echo of anguish, a silent cry of despair. Matto was not the child I knew, not even the young man it hot he was trapped in something dark, and worst of all, I couldn't help him. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the sofa watching the clock as if I could stop time just by wishing it. My mind went over and over Matteo's words, those of the group he had been involved with, and the uncertainty of what might happen if I decided to act. Finally, at dawn, I made a decision. I knew I couldn't allow my son to continue down that path without doing something, no matter how much it cost. May couldn't sit idly by, so the next day I went to a lawyer. I needed to understand the legal implications of what Matto had done, and more importantly, if there was any way to protect him from what appeared to be a network of dangerous activities. Throughout the conversation with the lawyer, I felt the weight of the situation increase even more. Not only was Matteo's future at stake, but mine as well. Would I be able to face the consequences of everything that was being revealed? At the end of the meeting, the lawyer gave me an address and a contact number. "This is an expert in these types of situations. If you decide to act, you will need someone with experience, but prepare for the worst. Things will not be easy." Thelwire's words echoed in my mind and I felt even more lost. Matto was trapped in a vicious circle, and I didn't know if I could break it, but there was something that drove me to keep going: the love I felt for him, the need to protect him. I couldn't let all this fall apart without fighting for what was left of our relationship. That night, after days of uncertainty, I finally made the decision to confront Matto. Once again, I knew that what I had done so far had not been enough to convince him that he needed help, but I could no longer continue to Watch from the shadows waiting for everything to resolve itself. My son needed to understand that the could trust me that he was not alone, and at that hour he was again in his room as always. I went to his door with my heart racing and my mind full of conflicting thoughts. I knocked softly and instantly I heard his voice from inside. Mom, not now please, but I could no longer back down. I opened the door and went in, this time with the determination not to give up. Matto turned to look at me with that air of distrust that he had had for so long, but this time his gaze was different. He seemed more vulnerable, more willing to listen. Matto, I've made a decision, I said in a firm voice, trying to remain calm. I know you're going through something very complicated, and I know you did it because you thought it was the only way out, but I want you to understand that you can always count on me. You don't have to do this alone. He was silent for a long time, but I could see how his eyes softened, how a shadow of doubt began to cross his face. Mom, I didn't know if I'll be able to get out of this. Everything I've done has dragged me too far. I don't know how. Matto, you have try. I'm not going to leave you. We're going to find a way to get out of this together, but you have to trust me and you have to cut ties with them. There's no other way. Finally, after a few minutes of silence, Matto nodded, albeit hesitantly. I'll try, Mom, I'll do what I can, but I'm afraid of what might happen. I understood. I was also afraid, but what terrified me most was the idea of not trying anything, of sitting idly by while my son sank deeper and deeper into that abyss. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that we would face dangers and difficult decisions, but I also knew that it was our last chance to save what was left of our relationship. That night, when I left his room, I felt a small spark of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but at that moment I was determined to fight for my son, to fight for him, for our family, for the love that could still save us.